There is a moment in South Park where a boy feeds another boy a bowl of chili made from that boy's own murdered parents, and the show plays it completely straight. By the standards of this list, that chili is one of the gentler moments. For almost 30 years, a cartoon that looks made for little kids has quietly gone to some of the most disturbing places television has ever reached. Murdered families, devil worship hidden inside a Christmas story, a small child left to die, a beloved friend killed off out of real anger, and once, a set of jokes that brought real death threats down on the people who made the show. This video walks calmly through 10 of the darkest, most disturbing South Park moments ever aired, the ones that stay with you long after the laughing stops. Welcome to East Park, let's begin. The cruelest thing a cartoon has ever shown. By the summer of 2001, South Park had been on the air for almost 4 years, and people thought they knew exactly what the show was. 4 foul-mouthed boys in a small mountain town, a kid who died in nearly every episode, jokes about poop, a talking piece of Christmas poop, aliens, and grown-ups who never learned a thing. The show was rude and fast and silly, and most of the time it was happy to stay that way. Eric Cartman fit right into that world. He was loud and selfish, he hated Kyle for being Jewish, and he threw screaming fits whenever he did not get his way. He was a brat, a bad kid, the kind of kid every classroom has one of. Nobody watching in those early years thought of him as anything worse than that. Then came the 4th episode of the 5th season, which aired on the 11th of July, 2001. It was the 69th episode the show had ever made, and its name was Scott Tenorman Must Die. By the time the credits rolled, the kid everyone thought they understood had turned into something nobody saw coming. This is where the whole idea of a dark South Park really begins. The show had been gross before, and mean before. What changed here was the smile coming off. The episode is built like a slow trap, and the person setting the trap is a 9-year-old boy. Watching it now, knowing how the show would grow over the next 20+ years, it plays like the quiet moment South Park told everyone how far it was willing to go. The setup sounds harmless enough. Cartman runs up to his friends one morning, thrilled because he believes he has hit puberty before any of them. He has the pubes to prove it. Stan and Kyle take one look and start laughing because the pubes are not his. He bought them. He handed $10 to an older boy named Scott Tenorman who swore that buying them counted. It does not count. A person has to grow their own. Cartman has been played for a fool and he wants his money back. What follows is a long string of small defeats. Cartman goes to Scott again and again, and every single time Scott is 2 steps ahead of him. Scott takes even more of his money. He sends Cartman on a pointless trip all the way to another town for a pube fair that does not exist. He makes Cartman get down on the ground and act like a little pig, snorting and rolling around in front of a crowd before finally burning the $10 bill right in front of his face so there is no chance of getting it back. For almost any other kid, that would be the end of the story. A rotten day. A lesson about not trusting older boys. For Cartman, something else clicks into place. He does not get sad. He goes quiet. He decides that Scott Tenorman has to pay, and he starts to plan. His first idea is strange and cruel and still cartoonish. He trains one of Farmer Denkin's ponies to bite off Scott's private parts, practicing on a scarecrow with a hot dog stuffed down its pants. He even pulls Stan and Kyle into the scheme. They want nothing to do with it, so they go and warn Scott about the pony. And this is the exact spot where the episode turns from a goofy revenge story into something much colder, because Cartman wanted them to do that. He was counting on it. The clever part of the whole thing is that the audience, just like Scott, believes they already know what Cartman is up to. The pony. The ridiculous pony. Everyone is watching the pony. Cartman sets up a chili cook-off in town and invites Scott, knowing Scott will show up ready to win. Scott thinks he has the whole plan figured out. He is sure Cartman still wants to use that pony out at the Denkins ranch, so he sends his own mother and father to go fetch the animal and take it to a shelter, keeping himself far away from any danger. That single choice is the heart of the trap. Cartman counted on it. He had already gone out to Farmer Denkins and warned him that dangerous people were coming to hurt his animals that night. Denkins is the kind of man who shoots trespassers on sight, no questions asked. So when Scott's parents wandered onto his land in the dark to collect a pony, Denkins did the thing Cartman knew he would do. He shot them both dead. The show does not stop to dwell on it. The moment is fast and almost matter-of-fact, and that lightness somehow makes it sit even heavier. Then the cook-off arrives. Scott has his own little prank loaded and ready. He has filled a pot of chili with pubic hair collected from every boy in town, and he plans to feed it to Cartman in front of everybody as one last insult. The two of them sit down and trade bowls. Cartman eats Scott's chili. Scott eats Cartman's. The crowd is in on Scott's joke and leaning in to laugh. Scott opens his mouth to reveal the disgusting secret hiding in Cartman's bowl, and Cartman, calm as still water, tells him he already knew. He switched the bowls before they sat down. He had guessed every move Scott would make, all the way down the line, because he planned every single step of this from the very beginning. Then he tells Scott the part that nobody guessed. The chili Scott has been eating, the chili Scott has nearly finished, was made from the bodies of his own mother and father. Cartman went out to the farm right after the shooting, while Denkins was busy giving his report to the town policeman, and he stole the two bodies. He spent the whole night cutting them up with a saw. He cooked them into the chili, and he gave that chili a name made from Scott's dead parents. Scott does not believe it at first. Then he reaches down into the bowl and pulls out his mother's finger, her ring still on it. He throws it away. He throws up. And then this older boy, the one who had spent the entire episode winning, falls completely apart and starts to cry that his mom and dad are dead. What the show does in the next few seconds is the coldest stretch of all. Cartman feels no guilt. He does not flinch or panic. He climbs up onto the table and sings, bouncing and gleeful, that he made Scott eat his parents. Then he leans in close to Scott's crying face and tells him how delicious the tears taste, soaking up the boy's pain like it is the finest thing he has ever felt. The other kids stare in pure horror, and right at that moment, because Cartman had also mailed them a fake letter to lure them into town, the band Radiohead walks in. They have no clue what just happened. All they see is a teenage boy sobbing at a table, so they call him a crybaby and walk away, and the show plays it as the final joke. For most of its runtime, the comedy keeps the horror at a safe distance. The pony is silly, the hair in the chili is silly, the whole cook-off feels like a cartoon. By the time the real plan is laid bare, all that silliness has worn the audience down and left them wide open, so the gut punch slides right past their guard. The episode spends nearly all its energy making sure nobody is braced for the ending. Underneath the chili and the screaming, the story is making one clear point about who Cartman truly is. A normal angry kid wants to win the fight. He might throw a punch, spread a rumor, get someone grounded. Cartman did not want to win. He wanted Scott wiped out, and he was patient enough and cold enough to spend days building a plan that ended with a boy eating his own parents. Every piece of it only works because Cartman read each person around him perfectly. He knew his friends would betray him and warn Scott. He knew Scott would send his parents instead of going himself. He knew the farmer would pull the trigger. He moved all of them around like pieces on a board, and he enjoyed the final move more than any toy or prize ever could have pleased him. This is the episode that locked in who Cartman would be for the rest of the show's life. Before it, he was a brat. After it, he was the most feared kid in town, a boy the other children quietly learned never to truly push too far. The two men who make the show, Trey Parker and Matt Stone, have said straight out that the entire reason they built this episode was to prove how evil Cartman could be. They were not easing into the idea. They sat down and crafted a whole story for the single purpose of showing the world what this character was made of, and it worked so well that every season afterward had to carry that weight. The fans have never let go of it either. For years, it has sat near the top of almost every list of the show's best and darkest moments. People who have never watched a single other episode still know about the chili. The little song Cartman sings about what he did gets passed around and quoted constantly. The reason it stuck so hard is that the show committed to it all the way. There was no last-second rescue, no reset button, no moment where the crowd laughs and the parents turn out to be alive and well. Scott's parents stay dead. Scott stays broken. The episode just ends, and the town goes back to normal as if nothing happened. A big part of why it cuts so deep is the gap between how the show looks and what it actually does. South Park is drawn with simple shapes, flat colors, and little flapping paper mouths. It looks like something made for small children. A show this gentle on the outside is not supposed to be able to reach this kind of darkness, and that mismatch is the whole weapon. The softer the wrapping looks, the harder the thing hidden inside lands. The rest of why it lands is the patience. Plenty of stories let a villain do something terrible in one hot flash of anger. This is slower and worse than that. Cartman is never out of control. He is calm the entire time, even cheerful, working steadily toward a goal he picked with a clear head. A burst of rage is something most people can understand and forgive. A child who plans for days, who thinks through every reaction of every person, who waits for the perfect second to feed a boy his parents, and then drinks in the tears, is much harder to brush off as a normal naughty kid. That cold patience is the thing people carry with them long after the episode ends. For a show that would go on to spend the next 20 years poking at every dark corner of the world, this is the cornerstone. Scott Tenorman Must Die is South Park learning that it could could make people feel truly disturbed instead of merely grossed out, and choosing to do exactly that on purpose. Every darker thing that came later, every death, every cruel twist, every story that traded an easy laugh for a chill down the spine, grew out of the moment the show proved it had no bottom floor. The chili was South Park planting a flag and announcing that nothing at all was off limits. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Here, Cartman's cruelty is loud and out in the open, dressed up in a goofy revenge plot that hides the blade until the very last second. The next time the show wanted to travel somewhere this dark, it tried the opposite move. It took its worst ideas and buried them inside the sweetest, softest, most innocent thing it could find. A few years after the chili, South Park made a Christmas special, complete with talking forest animals, falling snow, a kind little narrator, and a cheerful song. And that gentle storybook would slowly twist into one of the most disturbing half hours the show has ever put on screen. Section 2. The cutest horror story on television. 3.5 years after the chili, South Park made something that looks, at first glance, like the gentle opposite of a horror story. On the 15th of December 2004, the show aired the 14th and final episode of its 8th season, the 125th episode it had ever made. The name was Woodland Critter Christmas. Trey Parker wrote it and directed it, the same man behind the Scott Tenorman story, and it became one of the most loved and most disturbing things the show ever put on the air, both of those at the very same time. The first thing anyone notices is how soft it looks and how soft it sounds. The whole episode is told like an old-fashioned Christmas picture book. There is a narrator with a warm, friendly voice, and he speaks in gentle little rhymes, the sing-song kind a bedtime story uses to put a child to sleep. Snow is falling, a cheerful song plays, and in the middle of a quiet winter forest, a group of small talking animals is busy getting ready for Christmas. There is a squirrel, a rabbit, a beaver, a porcupine, and a few others, all big-eyed and adorable. The sort of cute woodland creatures a little kid would want as stuffed toys. They are exactly the kind of characters that belong on a greeting card. A boy walks into the middle of this scene, the one the narrator keeps calling the boy in the red puffball hat. That boy is Stan Marsh. The critters are thrilled to see him and ask for his help building a small stable to welcome the birth of their Lord and Savior. Stan, a little confused but going along with it, helps them put a star on top of their tree before heading home for the night. So far, the whole thing feels like a sweet holiday special aimed at 5-year-olds. That feeling is the trap, and the show builds it on purpose. Everything about the look and the sound of the episode is designed to lower the guard, to make the next part hit with no warning at all. The cuteness is the camouflage. The softer and more harmless the forest seems, the more room there is underneath it for something terrible to grow. The animals visit Stan that night to fill him in on the happy news. One of them, a porcupine named Porcupiney, is about to give birth, and her baby is going to be their savior. They ask Stan to help protect the forest while they wait for the big arrival. There is even a problem to solve, the way every Christmas story has a problem. A mountain lion keeps prowling around and threatening the critters, so they beg Stan to deal with her. Wanting to help his cute little friends, Stan finds the mountain lion and kills her. It feels, in the moment, like the heroic thing to do. Then, the floor drops out. Not long after, Stan learns the truth about the adorable animals he has been helping. They are devil worshippers. The savior they are so excited to welcome is not a holy child at all. The thing being born is the Antichrist, a kind of evil savior, the spawn of the devil himself. And these sweet forest creatures have been working the whole time to bring it into the world. The friendly Christmas story Stan thought he was inside of has been a setup for the end of everything good. The animals celebrate the coming birth in a way no Christmas special has ever shown. They grab one of their own, the rabbit, and tear him apart, eating his insides while the others cheer. Then they roll around together in a wild, bloody frenzy, gleeful and giggling, blood everywhere, all still drawn in that same cute storybook style. Stan, horrified, tries to stop them. The critters simply laugh and use their devil powers to push him back, calling up fire and snarling monsters out of thin air. The cuddly little animals turn out to be far more powerful and far more evil than the boy who was trying to help them. Stan finds out that only a mountain lion can kill the Antichrist. The mountain lion he was tricked into killing, the one the critters painted as the villain, was actually the one creature that could have stopped them. She left behind 3 orphaned cubs, and Stan, full of guilt, goes back to find them. From here, the story gets stranger and darker still. The narrator, that warm storybook voice, takes control of Stan and forces him to do things he does not want to do. He is made to bring the cubs to a doctor and learn how to perform an abortion, so that the Antichrist can be ended before it is ever born. Stan Stan begs not to, and the narrator pushes him forward anyway, narrating his every step in that same cheerful rhyme. While Stan is gone, the critters realize they need a body for the Antichrist to climb into once it is born. The host has to be a person who has never been baptized and is not a Christian. They go looking, and they find Kyle Broflovsky, who is Jewish, which makes him fit their needs perfectly. They kidnap him and tie him to an altar to wait for the evil thing to take him over. Stan races back to the forest, but he is too late. The Antichrist has already been born, a small, snarling, hairless creature, and Kyle is strapped down and ready to receive it. Right at the last second, the door bursts open and Santa Claus walks in. When he sees what is happening, Santa pulls out a shotgun and mows the whole group of devil-worshipping critters down, killing them all in a spray of gunfire. He turns to finish off the Antichrist too. And then Kyle, freed from the ropes, suddenly says he wants the evil spirit to take him over after all, so that he can use its power to make the world a better place for the Jews. The Antichrist pours into Kyle's body. The cubs do what they were trained to do and pull it back out of him, and Santa finishes the creature off for good. The biggest twist comes after all of that. The scene cuts away from the bloody forest and lands in a normal 4th grade classroom. The whole nightmare, every cute critter, and every drop of blood was a story. Cartman made it up and has been reading it out loud to the class for a write your own Christmas story assignment. Kyle, sitting in his seat, is furious because the entire thing was just one more way for Cartman to make fun of him for being Jewish. This time by writing him into a story as the willing host of the devil's child. The warm narrator returns one final time to wrap up the tale the way a storybook should. Everyone lived happily ever after, he says, except for Kyle, who died of a horrible disease 2 weeks later. Kyle, in the classroom, can only groan Cartman's name in anger. Underneath the snow and the blood, the episode is doing two clever things at once. The first is the camouflage trick. The Scott Tenorman story hid its cruelty inside a goofy revenge plot, and only revealed the knife at the very end. This story hides its horror inside the most innocent, most harmless shape it could find, a children's Christmas cartoon. And the gap between how it looks and what it shows is the entire point. The cuter the critters, the more shocking it is when they rip each other open. A scary story that looks scary gives a person time to brace. A scary story dressed as a holiday special slips right past every defense. The second thing tucked underneath is who is really telling the tale. By the end, every awful image in the episode turns out to have come from Cartman's head. He sat down and wrote a Christmas story whose only real purpose was to picture Kyle as the chosen body for the Antichrist and then have him die at the end. That brings the whole half hour back to the same place the Chili lived. The darkness was never really about devil worshippers in a forest. It was about a boy using whatever tools he could grab, even a sweet little Christmas rhyme, to hurt the kid he hates the most. The forest was the costume. Cartman's cruelty was the body underneath. This episode has earned a strange double reputation among the people who watch the show. It sits high on nearly every list of the darkest South Park episodes ever made, and it also sits high on lists of the best and funniest. Fans love it precisely because it goes so far while wearing such a soft mask. The storybook narration, the rhymes, the cute designs, the calm holiday tone laid over scenes of sacrifice and gunfire, all of it lands as a single long joke about how cheerful something awful can pretend to be. The line about Kyle dying 2 weeks later gets quoted again and again, partly because the warm narrator delivers it like the happiest ending in the world. The critters even left a mark big enough to come back. For more than 2 decades, they stayed gone, a one-time creation from a single Christmas episode. Then in 2025, in the show's 28th season, South Park brought the woodland critters back for the first time in 21 years, returning them to a Christmas episode all over again. A group of characters built for one twisted holiday tale turned out to be memorable enough that the show wanted them once more, all those years later. What makes the episode work so well is the same thing that made the Chili work, only flipped around. The Scott Tenorman story put a calm, patient evil out in plain sight and let it walk straight toward the audience. Woodland Critter Christmas takes that same willingness to go anywhere and buries it under the friendliest wrapping paper the show could find. Both come from the same root. The show had already proven, with the Chili, that it had no bottom floor and no line it refused to cross. This episode shows the other half of that freedom. South Park could put its darkness right in front of a person, and it could also hide that darkness inside a snow globe and wait for the moment to shatter it. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. That second skill, the talent for hiding something cruel inside something that looks safe, would eventually point itself away from made-up forests and devil children. The show would aim it at the real world world instead. A few seasons later, South Park turned that same trick on a living, breathing famous person, someone millions of people watched fall apart in real life, and it asked an ugly question about who was really to blame for tearing her down. Section 3. The crowd is the killer. The first two stories in this video both kept their darkness inside made-up worlds: a chili cook-off in a cartoon town, a devil-worshipping forest dreamed up by a fourth grader. The horror was awful, but it was safely fenced off as fiction. On the 19th of March 2008, South Park did something that felt different and far more uncomfortable. It pointed its darkness straight at a real, living, famous person, someone millions of people were watching struggle in real life at that very moment. The episode was the second one of the show's 12th season, the 169th episode overall, and Trey Parker wrote it and directed it. Its name was Britney's New Look. To understand why the episode landed the way it did, the real world around it matters. In the year or so before this episode aired, the real Britney Spears was going through one of the most public hard times anyone has ever lived through. Photographers followed her everywhere. Gossip shows ran news stories about her almost every single day. She shaved her head in front of a wall of cameras. She lost time with her children in an ugly fight. She was taken to the hospital and her life was placed under the control of other people who would now make her decisions for her. All of this played out as entertainment, sold to the public in pictures and headlines. The episode arrived right in the middle of that storm, while the real woman it was based on was still living through it. South Park almost never feels sorry for the famous people it puts on screen. The show usually exists to tear celebrities apart, to find the most embarrassing version of a star and run with it. This time the show did the rare thing and took the side of the person everyone else was tearing apart. The joke is not aimed at her. The joke is aimed at everyone holding a camera, and at everyone buying the pictures. The shape of the episode is borrowed from an old short story that many kids read in school. A story about a small town that picks one person each year and stones them to death, believing the killing will give them a good harvest. The town in that story does it calmly, like a normal yearly event, with neighbors lining up to throw stones at someone they have known their whole lives. South Park takes that exact idea and pours it over modern fame. It opens on a fake live debate between Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton, who were both running for president at the time. The serious broadcast gets cut off by breaking news, because Britney Spears has been spotted, and that is treated as far more important than any election. A photographer caught her doing something gross while camping near South Park, and that single photo earned him $100,000. Stan, Kyle, Cartman, and Butters hear about that money and decide they want some of it, so they set out to snap their own embarrassing picture of her. Butters gets stuffed into a squirrel costume as part of the plan, the boys hoping to catch Britney in some humiliating moment they can sell. They sneak past the guards at her hotel by claiming to be her children, and the guards let them through. Then the episode turns hard. Worn down to nothing by the endless cameras and pressure, Britney tries to end her own life with a gun. She does not die. She survives, but the top of her head is mostly gone. She is left alive and barely there, unable to see or hear or speak, able only to make wet gurgling sounds through what is left of her mouth. It is a grim, grotesque image drawn in the show's flat cartoon style, and the horror of it is meant to be felt. What happens next is the part that turns the stomach. The world does not stop. The cameras do not lower out of respect. The people around her treat her ruined body as just another stage in her career. Her manager keeps her working. She is propped up and made to record a comeback song. She is sent out to perform at a huge award show, and the crowd there picks apart her flaws and judges her looks, barely noticing or caring that most of her skull is missing and that she can only gurgle. The joke is brutal and clear. The public will keep feeding on a person even after that person has been all but destroyed, because the destroying was the entertainment all along. Stan and Kyle are the only two who seem to understand that something is deeply wrong. Guilt eats at them for having joined the chase. They decide to save Britney, to get her somewhere far away from all the cameras, and they come up with a plan to put her on a train and take her up to the North Pole where no one can reach her. For a little while, it looks like the episode might let her escape. The train stops at a small village. Waiting there are the photographers, a crowd of ordinary people, and Kyle. The villagers calmly explain the thing the whole episode has been building toward. Britney was never just a celebrity having a bad time. She was being raised up on purpose, like the victim in that old short story, so that she could be killed as an offering for a good corn harvest. In the old days, the villagers say, people would stone their chosen victim to death. In modern, more polite times, they prefer to drive the person to take their own life instead. The cameras and the headlines and the cruelty were the new version of the stones. Kyle is horrified and demands to know who is part of this. The answer is the gut punch of the episode. It is everyone. Standing in that crowd, ready to take part, are Randy and Sharon Marsh, Stan's own parents, and Cartman's mother, and faces from all over the town and the show. One of them tells Kyle that the whole country is in on it, that they are all part of this together. The people doing the killing are not some secret evil group, they are the regular folks, the neighbors, the parents, the audience. The crowd closes in on Brittany and photographs her to death, snapping picture after picture until she is gone, with Stan and Kyle left standing there in shock, unable to stop any of it. The sacrifice is complete. The episode does not end on that horror. It jumps ahead a few months to a normal grocery store, where the people of South Park are happily chatting about what a wonderful corn harvest they had this year. The killing worked, in their minds. Then a news report comes on, about a fresh young star on the rise, the next big famous girl everyone is excited about. The shoppers all turn toward the screen with the same hungry look, and they begin to sing the same eerie song they sang before, already choosing their next offering.
Stan and Kyle, standing among them, roll their eyes. They have learned that fighting the crowd is hopeless, so they give up, and they reluctantly join in the singing too. The machine simply rolls on to its next victim. Beneath the gore and the dark jokes, the episode is making one steady point. The monster in this story is not a single villain. The monster is the crowd. The cameras are the weapon. The photographers are the hands. And the audience buying the pictures is the reason any of it happens. South Park took the way the real world treats famous people in trouble and stated the ugliest possible version of it out loud. The public claims to love its stars, then slowly destroys them for fun, then acts surprised and sad when they break, and then moves on to the next one without missing a beat. A big reason the episode hits so hard is the timing. The real Britney Spears was, at that very moment, living through a version of what the cartoon was showing.
People watching the episode in 2008 had spent months consuming photos and stories about her lowest days. The show held a mirror up and asked a sharp question. The people laughing at her, the people clicking on the pictures, the people who could not look away. What exactly were they taking part in? The discomfort of the episode comes from the fact that watching was never innocent. Every viewer who had followed the real woman's downfall was, in some small way, one of the villagers in the crowd. The other reason it stays with people is how rare the kindness is. South Park built its whole name on having no soft spot for anyone. Seeing it suddenly stand up for a target, seeing it treat a punching bag celebrity as a real human being worth protecting, caught a lot of viewers off guard. The episode lets Stan and Kyle care about her, and it punishes them for that caring by making them watch her die anyway.
The bleakness of the ending, with the two boys forced to give up and join the song, is one of the darker notes the show has ever ended on, because it offers no win and no hope, only the promise that the same thing will happen again to someone new. This story connects back to the two before it in a way that shows how the show's darkness kept growing. The Chili put cruelty out in the open and let a planning, patient mind walk it right up to the audience. The Christmas Forest hid its horror inside the softest, cutest wrapping it could find and then ripped that wrapping away. Britney's new look does a third thing. It takes the darkness out of the made-up world entirely and aims it at the real one, at a real person and the real public chewing her up. The show that proved it had no bottom floor now turned the camera around and pointed it at the people watching. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously.
That habit of aiming the darkness at real targets did not stop with one struggling pop star. Later in the very same season, the show went after two of the most famous and powerful men in all of movie making, beloved by millions, and it did so in a way so extreme that even longtime fans found it hard to sit through. The people who made the episode were not joking around or exaggerating for effect. They meant every uncomfortable second of it, and the network that aired it, rather than fighting back, mostly just hoped the whole thing would quietly go away. Section 4. The joke that was not a joke. The pattern by now is clear. South Park kept finding new places to aim its darkness, and each time it pushed a little further out into the real world. The last episode pointed at a famous woman and the crowd tearing her down. On the 8th of October 2008, the show went after two of the most beloved and powerful men in all of movie making, and it did so with a sincerity that made the whole thing far more unsettling than a normal joke. The episode was the 8th one of the 12th season, the 175th overall, written and directed by Trey Parker. Its name was The China Problem, with the second word spelled wrong on purpose to poke at a stereotyped accent. Two real-life events fed this episode. The first was the 2008 Summer Olympics in Beijing, China, whose opening ceremony was one of the biggest and most jaw-dropping shows ever put on, with thousands of performers moving in perfect time. The second was a movie. That summer, after almost 20 years, a brand new Indiana Jones film had come out, and a huge number of longtime fans walked away crushed, feeling the movie had wrecked a hero they had had loved since childhood. Both of these things happened during the show's mid-season break.
By the time the episode finally aired in October, the Olympics were long over and the movie complaints had mostly died down, which is unusual for a show that normally reacts to the news within days. This one arrived a little late, carrying anger that had been sitting and building for months. The episode runs on two stories at once. The first is the one the title points at. After watching that massive Olympic opening ceremony, Cartman becomes convinced that China, with its huge population and its advanced technology, is days away from invading and taking over America. He has terrible nightmares about it. He tries to warn Stan, Kyle, and Kenny, and they brush him off completely. Refusing to give up, he pulls Butters into his cause, scaring the gentle kid by telling him that the Chinese are going to come and kill his parents. The two of them form a little group with a grand name, the American Liberation Front, and set out to stop the invasion themselves.
Their plan is to spy on the Chinese to learn the secret invasion schedule, so Cartman and Butters dress up in a crude stereotype disguise, complete with fake buck teeth and a put-on accent, and try to pass themselves off as a couple of Chinese kids inside a P.F. Chang's restaurant. The bit is built on a cartoonish, exaggerated version of how a clueless kid might imagine Chinese people, and the joke partly turns on how badly and offensively the two of them play it. The restaurant owner is not fooled for a second and calls them out for pretending to be a silly stereotype. The whole crusade falls apart by the end, after Butters shoots a man in a very painful place, and Cartman finally throws in the towel, deciding he would rather just be conquered by China than belong to a country full of people who shoot each other like that. That first story is uncomfortable on its own. The second story is the reason the episode became infamous.
While Cartman chases his invasion, Kyle and several of the other boys are walking around traumatized, haunted by something terrible they witnessed. Kyle keeps having flashbacks. He talks in a shaking and serious voice about how one of the greatest heroes of all time was attacked, about the awful crime he and his friends just stood by and watched without doing anything to stop it. The show plays all of this exactly like the aftermath of a real and serious assault. The boys give tearful witness statements. A grown lawyer breaks down too because he saw the same thing. The weight and the language are the weight and the language a story would use for a genuine victim of a violent crime. Then the episode reveals what the boys actually witnessed. The hero is Indiana Jones, the character from the movies. The crime is the new Indiana Jones film. South Park staged the making of that disappointing sequel as if the two men behind it, George Lucas and Steven Spielberg, had sexually attacked the Indiana Jones character. The episode shows the two real, famous directors as villains assaulting the hero again and again, and it treats the boys watching the movie in the theater the same way it would treat children forced to watch a brutal attack on someone they loved. The kids then set out to bring Lucas and Spielberg to justice for the crime, dragging them toward court the way a town would chase down a dangerous criminal. The ending pushes the idea even harder, with the police finally catching the two men in the middle of attacking yet another beloved movie character. To understand where this came from, it helps to know the show had a history with these two men. Years earlier, back in the 6th season, South Park made an episode where the boys form a club to save old films from their own directors, taking direct aim at Lucas and Spielberg for going back and changing and re-releasing the classic movies people grew up loving. The frustration was already there. The Indiana Jones story was that old anger finally boiling all the way over. The single most important fact about this episode is what separates it from almost everything else the show has done. It was not playing pretend. When South Park exaggerates, it usually winks at the audience to show it knows it is being ridiculous. Here, there was no wink. According to the talks the creators gave about the episode afterward, and the comments they recorded for the home release, Trey Parker and Matt Stone truly felt that Lucas and Spielberg had ruined the character, and they chose the most disturbing image they could think of to express that feeling. Matt Stone in particular hated the new movie.
The whole grotesque crime story was their honest, furious way of saying these two men destroyed something precious. A common belief grew up later that the episode was secretly mocking the fans for overreacting, for being so dramatic about a mere bad movie. The people who made it have made clear that this is not what they were doing. They were the ones overreacting, and they meant it. That sincerity is the dark engine of the whole thing. The episode takes a feeling almost everyone has had, the sting of seeing something you loved as a kid get spoiled by the very people who created it, and it makes that feeling completely literal. A ruined childhood memory becomes an actual violent crime, with a victim and attackers and a trial. The discomfort comes from watching the show borrow the heavy, painful language of a real and serious wrong and pour it over the small disappointment of a movie not being good. Using that kind of imagery to describe a bad sequel is the exact sort of line crossing that made even the show's most loyal fans squirm. The reaction outside the show matched that unease. One British newspaper writer said the creators seemed to have taken their habit of breaking taboos to a place even hardened South Park watchers found hard to follow. There was also a strange behind-the-scenes wrinkle. The company that handled the Indiana Jones movies was connected, through its larger owners, to the same family of companies that ran the channel airing South Park. So the show was, in a roundabout way, attacking a product made under its own corporate roof. Reports at the time said the movie side had no plans to publicly fight the episode, and mostly just wanted it to quietly disappear. Lucas and Spielberg, for their part, never took the show to court over being shown as monsters, even though the episode painted them about as badly as a person can be painted. Among fans, the episode has kept a split reputation ever since. Some defend it as the show at its boldest, willing to say the unsayable about two untouchable giants. Many others count it among the episodes they wish had never been made, finding the central image more gross and mean than funny, and feeling that the show punched well past the point of a clever joke. That divide is its own kind of legacy. An episode that fans cannot agree on, that some want erased entirely, is an episode that clearly touched a nerve. This story lines up with the ones before it, and shows how far the show was willing to reach. The chili kept its cruelty inside the cartoon town. The Christmas forest hid horror under a cute and gentle shell. Brittany took aim at a real person and the real crowd destroying her. The China Problem went after two of the most respected and powerful living people in entertainment, refused to soften the blow with a wink, and dared them to respond.
The show that had proven it owned no bottom floor now proved something else. That it would point its darkness at literally anyone, no matter how famous, how beloved, or how closely tied to the people signing its own checks. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. There is one quiet detail at the edge of this episode that points toward the next story. The China Problem carried a small dedication to Isaac Hayes, the soul music legend who had died that same year. For nearly a decade, Hayes had given his rich, warm voice to one of the most loved characters the show ever had, the kind cafeteria worker the boys turned to whenever they needed advice. Putting his name on this episode was the show paying respect to a man who had been part of its family from the very beginning.
2 years before this dedication, though, that relationship had ended in anger, and South Park had answered that anger by killing off the very character Hayes had brought to life, in one of the coldest acts of revenge the show ever put on screen. All of it growing out of a real fight over what a person is and is not allowed to make fun of. Section 5. The friend they killed out of anger. Of all the grown-ups in South Park, one stood apart from the rest. The parents were clueless, the teachers were strange, and the town leaders were useless. Chef was different. He was the warm, kind cafeteria cook at the boys' school, the one adult who actually listened when they had a problem, the friend they ran to whenever the world stopped making sense. He gave them advice, he sang them songs, and he treated them like they mattered. From the show's very first episode back in 1997, that deep, rich voice belonged to a real soul music legend named Isaac Hayes, and his warmth was a huge part of what made the character so loved. On the 22nd of March 2006, in the very first episode of the show's 10th season, the 140th episode overall, South Park killed Chef off. The episode was written and directed by Trey Parker, and its name was The Return of Chef. The death did not come out of nowhere. It came out of a real fight, one that started off-screen and spilled onto it. To understand the episode, the fight has to come first. The season before, South Park aired an episode that took aim at Scientology, a religion many of its famous members guard fiercely, and at one of its best-known followers, the movie star Tom Cruise. That earlier episode made fun of the religion's beliefs and made fun of Cruise in ways that stung. Isaac Hayes, the man behind Chef's voice, was himself a follower of Scientology. Not long after that episode, Hayes put out a public statement saying he was leaving the show. In it, he said there was a place in the world for making fun of things, but that there came a point where joking ended and cruelty toward people's religious beliefs began. He did not name Scientology directly, but the meaning seemed plain enough to everyone reading it. The men who run South Park did not see it the same way. Matt Stone responded that Hayes had never once complained in all the years the show had poked fun at other religions, at Christians, at Jewish people, at Catholics, at anyone. The trouble only started, in Stone's telling, when the show finally turned its attention to Scientology. The way the creators saw it, their old friend was fine with the jokes right up until the jokes landed on his own beliefs. Then things got stranger. Around the same time, a planned rerun of that Scientology episode was suddenly yanked off the air with no clear explanation. Reports went around claiming that Tom Cruise had used his fame and power to get it buried, a claim a spokesman for Cruise denied. Whatever the truth was, Parker and Stone were angry, and they promised the world that payback was coming. The return of Chef was that payback. It aired as the season opener just days after Hayes' departure became public, and the timing made the message clear. This was the show answering a fight. The episode itself starts almost happy. Chef has been away from South Park, off traveling with a group called the Super Adventure Club, and one day he comes back to town. The boys are overjoyed. Their favorite adult, the friend they had missed, is finally home. But something is wrong with him. Chef does not talk like himself anymore. The Super Adventure Club, it turns out, has filled his head with twisted, terrible ideas.
The once gentle man now says disturbing and deeply wrong things, including talk of wanting to do unspeakable things to children, and the boys are left frightened and confused, staring at a friend who has somehow been turned into a stranger. They quickly realize he has been brainwashed, his mind scrambled by the club he fell in with, and they set out to rescue the real Chef trapped somewhere underneath. The way the show built Chef's new lines is one of the coldest details of the whole thing. Isaac Hayes did not record a single new word for this episode. He was gone. So the creators went back through years of old episodes, pulled out words and phrases Hayes had recorded long ago, and cut them up and pasted them back together to make Chef say brand new sentences, including the brainwashed and disturbing ones. The man's own voice, the warm voice that had made the character beloved, was taken apart piece by piece and rebuilt to serve the show's revenge.
Chef speaks throughout the episode, and every sound of him is stitched from things Hayes said back when he was still part of the family. Then comes the death, and the show does not make it quick or gentle. While crossing a rickety rope bridge high over a deep ravine, Chef falls. He drops a long way down. On the way, he is struck by lightning. He lands hard and broken on the rocks far below. And then, while he lies there, wild animals, a bear and a mountain lion, come and tear into him. It is a brutal, piled-on, almost cartoonishly cruel ending, the kind of death the show usually saved for throwaway gags, now handed to one of its most cherished characters. The town holds a funeral, the boys gather to say goodbye, and Kyle stands up to speak. The choice the show makes in that speech is important. Kyle tells everyone that they should not be angry at Chef for the awful things he said and did at the end. The Chef they knew, the kind one who loved them, was the real one. The terrible version was the work of that fruity little club that scrambled his brains. The boys decide to remember their friend as he truly was, and to aim their anger at the group that took him from them. The show, in other words, refused to blame Chef himself. It blamed the organization it felt had stolen him away. The very last beat of the episode pulls back from the sadness with a strange joke. The members of the Super Adventure Club gather up what is left of Chef and rebuild him into a dark, robotic figure in a black suit and mask, a clear nod to a famous movie villain, with a new, deep mechanical voice. The door is left cracked open, the death not quite as final as it seemed, the whole thing capped with one more odd laugh. Underneath the brutal death and the brainwashing, the episode is doing two opposite things at the same time, and that is what makes it so unusual. It is a goodbye and an attack rolled together.
The show clearly wanted to protect Chef the character and Isaac Hayes the man. By blaming the Super Adventure Club for everything, the creators were saying that their friend had not really turned against them by choice. Something had gotten to him. Something had changed him. The kind man they remembered was still the true one, buried under the damage. That is a tender thing to say about someone you are saying goodbye to. At the very same time, the entire story is a strike against the religion the show believed had pulled their friend away. The made-up club that scrambles minds and does monstrous things was the show's way of painting Scientology as a force that takes good people and ruins them. Chef's death was both a loving farewell to a man and a furious blow aimed at the thing the show blamed for losing him. What gives this episode a weight that has only grown heavier with time is what came out years later.
At the moment the episode was made, Trey Parker and Matt Stone took Hayes' resignation at face value. They believed Hayes himself, hurt and offended, had chosen to walk away over the Scientology jokes, and they built their angry goodbye around that belief. The picture got more complicated as the years passed. Isaac Hayes died in 2008, a couple of years after the episode aired, following a stroke. Later on, his own son, Isaac Hayes III, came forward to tell a very different version of how his father left the show. According to the son, his father had suffered that stroke around the time of the departure, and was in no shape to be making big public decisions. The son said that people from Scientology who surrounded his father were the ones who actually quit the show on his behalf, that the famous resignation statement did not truly come from the man himself. His blunt summary of it was that his dad did not quit South Park. Park, that Scientology quit it for him.
The Sun has been fair to the show's creators about it. He has said he understands that Parker and Stone were in the dark at the time, that they had no way of knowing what was really happening behind the scenes, and that emotions were running high for everyone. Even so, he has said the way Chef was killed off never sat right with him, and never quite made sense to him. That leaves a deeply uncomfortable possibility hanging over the whole episode. The show may have taken a beloved character, cut up a sick man's old voice to make him say monstrous things, and killed him off in revenge against a person who might not have even been the one who chose to leave. A man who was unwell and possibly being spoken for by others. The strange power of South Park has always come from a simple trick of the eye. The show is drawn with flat shapes, plain colors, and little paper mouths that flap up and down, the kind of look a person connects with harmless cartoons made for small children.
That gentle surface is exactly what lets the darkness underneath it land so hard. A grim moment in a serious drama gives a viewer time to brace, because the whole show has been warning that something heavy is on the way. South Park gives no such warning. It keeps laughing and bouncing along, silly and bright, right up until the moment it quietly slips the knife in. That soft cartoon look is the weapon itself, and the show has spent nearly 30 years learning how to swing it with deadly and practiced aim, season after season, in dark story after dark story. Part of why the episode hits so hard is that mix of the brutal and the real. The death on screen is loud and over the top, a fall and a lightning bolt and hungry animals, the sort of thing that should play as a dark cartoon joke. The story behind it is quiet and messy and human, full of hurt feelings, a real fight over what people are allowed to make fun of, a real man with a real family and a real loss.
Watching a cherished character get torn apart is one thing. Knowing that the tearing apart was the show settling a score with a living person and learning years later that the person may not have wronged them the way they thought turns the whole thing into something far sadder than a simple cartoon death. This story closes a loop that the last section opened. The episode about the movie makers ended with the show placing Isaac Hayes' name on screen as a sign of respect. A quiet thank you to a man who had been part of the family since the start. Looking at the two side by side shows the full shape of the relationship. The same show that would gently honor Hayes after his death had, 2 years earlier, answered a fight with him by cutting up his voice and killing off the character he gave his life to. The darkness this video has been tracing was not always pointed at strangers or at the famous and powerful. Sometimes it landed on the people closest to the show itself, on a friend, settled in anger, in a way that only looked worse as the years went on. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. For all its cruelty, the death of Chef was still aimed at a grown man who had pushed back against the show, an adult who had picked a side in a fight and could, in some way, take what came next. The show's darkness did not always choose targets who could fight back. Sometimes it went the other direction entirely and fell on the softest, most harmless soul in the whole town. A sweet and trusting little boy who never hurt anyone, who only ever wanted his parents to be proud of him and to love him. And in one early episode, the show decided that this gentle child would discover a terrible family secret, and that his own mother would look at him and decide the world would be better off without him in it. Section 6. The Boy Who Trusted Too Much. In a town full of selfish, clueless, and downright cruel people, one character stood out as something close to pure. Butters Stotch was the gentlest, kindest, most trusting kid in all of South Park. He was endlessly cheerful, almost painfully polite, and he wanted nothing more than for the grown-ups around him to be proud of him. He believed people when they spoke to him. He did what he was told. He saw the good in everyone, even when there was no good to see. By the end of the 5th season, the show had begun to notice how special that quality was, and it gave Butters his first episode all to himself, the last one of the 5th season, the 79th episode the show had ever made. It aired on the 12th of December, 2001. The name was Butters' very own episode. The timing of it mattered.
Just 1 week earlier, the show had aired one of its saddest episodes ever, the one where Kenny finally died for a long stretch instead of his usual comeback. South Park was clearing space, getting ready to pull Butters forward into a bigger role, and this episode was the show introducing the world to who he really was, and what his life at home was actually like. What the audience found there was a nightmare wearing the face of a family sitcom. The story begins with something small and ordinary. Butters' mother wants to know what his father is planning to get her for their wedding anniversary, so she sends her sweet, obedient son out to secretly follow his dad and find out. Butters, happy to help, does exactly that. He trails his father across town, and what he discovers is not a hidden anniversary gift. He learns that his father has been keeping a secret life, slipping away to a place where grown men meet other men, carrying on in private without his wife knowing.
Butters does not fully understand what he is seeing. He is just a kid who was asked to follow his dad, and he reports back the way any helpful child would. When the secret comes out, Butters' mother breaks. Something in her snaps, and the calm, ordinary woman from the start of the episode is gone. In her pain and rage, she lands on a decision that is almost too dark to believe. She decides that her son has to die, and that she will die too. The reasons she gives herself are twisted and sad. She tells herself that her boy should not have to grow up in a broken home, that he should not be left behind, and so she settles on taking him with her. What happens next is the coldest, quietest horror the show had attempted up to that point. Butters' mother tells him in a flat and gentle voice that she wants to take him for a little car ride, just the two of them. Butters, trusting as ever, climbs in without a second thought. She drives the car straight into a river. Then, with the car settling into the water, she shifts it into neutral, steps out, and leaves her son sitting inside. She tells him to stay right where he is. She tells him not to undo his seatbelt and not to get out of the car. She tells him, softly, that she will be with him shortly, and then she walks away to let the water take him. The thing that makes the scene unbearable is Butters himself. He does not panic. He does not understand that his own mother has just left him to drown. He trusts her so completely, so totally, that he simply does what he is told. He stays in his seat. He keeps his seatbelt on. He waits, calm and obedient, for his mom to come back exactly as she asked. His goodness, the very thing that makes him so lovable, is the thing that is supposed to kill him. A more suspicious child, a more selfish one, would have unbuckled and run. Butters trusts too much to even try. By pure luck, the car does not sink the way his mother expected. The river current catches it and carries it a long way downstream before it finally comes to a stop. Butters, still not grasping what just happened, decides the whole thing must have been some kind of accident. He climbs out, perfectly fine, and his first thought is to hurry home so the family can still make it to their anniversary dinner at the restaurant his parents had planned to go to. He is not angry. He is not scared. He is worried about being late for a nice family evening, completely unaware that he was meant to die in that river. Back at home, the darkness keeps spreading. Butters' mother, certain she has drowned her son, is so crushed by what she believes she has done that she tries to take her own life. Her husband walks in just in time and stops her. The two of them, alone in their grief and their guilt, confess the truth to each other. The father admits to his secret life. The mother admits, in horror at herself, that she drowned their boy.
Then the episode adds another awful layer. The parents, thinking Butters is dead, decide to cover it all up rather than face what happened. They go to the news cameras and tell a complete lie, claiming that a stranger pulled a gun and kidnapped their son. To make this part land, the show drops Butters' parents into a lineup of real people who had been in the news for being suspected in serious cases and for the careful, slippery way they spoke to the press. The episode places the Stotches right alongside those real figures, treating them all as members of the same club, people who looked into the cameras and lied while a child's fate hung in the air. The show was poking hard at how the country watched these real cases and how the people at the center of them behaved. Butters, very much alive, makes his way back through town and finally reaches home. When he gets there and pieces together what his parents have been doing, the sweetest kid in South Park does something quietly powerful.
He scolds them, he tells them that lying is wrong, that they had always taught him not to lie, and that what they were doing was exactly that. His simple, honest words actually land. Shamed by their own innocent son, the parents decide to come clean to the public about the cover-up, and in the process of confessing everything, they end up telling Butters the full truth too, including the fact that his own mother had tried to kill him in that river. The ending is bitter and bleak in a way the show rarely allowed back then. The parents are not arrested. No one pays any real price for trying to murder a child and then lying about it to the whole country. The family simply patches itself back together and, unbelievably, still heads out to that anniversary dinner. Butters, for his part, finally lets a little of the weight show. He admits that after everything, he is probably going to be scarred for the rest of his life.
But he says it in his usual mild, accepting way, and then he goes along with his parents to the restaurant anyway, because that is who he is. Beneath the river and the lies, the episode works because of one cruel idea at its heart. Butters' innocence is the weapon the story turns against him. His trust is so complete that it nearly drowns him. His goodness is so total that he cannot even recognize when he is being treated as a victim. Watching a tough or clever character survive a threat is one kind of story. Watching a child so trusting that he calmly waits to die because his mother asked him to is something much harder to shake. The show took the single purest, most harmless soul it had ever overdrawn and placed him in the middle of casual, almost offhand cruelty, surrounded by adults who were supposed to protect him and who instead nearly destroyed him and then walked away clean. There is a real-world thread running under it too.
By lining Butters' parents up with actual people from real painful cases that the whole country had followed, the show was making a sharp point about lying, about cover-ups, and about how easily people in the spotlight can shape a story while the truth stays buried. Years later, the show's creators looked back on this and admitted some regret. In a later interview, Trey Parker and Matt Stone said they were sorry for the way they had portrayed some of those real figures, people connected to genuine tragedies and unsolved cases. The willingness to admit that is rare for them, and it shows that even they understood this episode had reached into real, raw places. The lasting importance of the episode goes beyond its single dark hour. This was the show building Butters into a major character, and the home life it showed here became the foundation for everything that came after. From this point on, the audience understood that behind Butters' endless cheer sat a deeply sad situation. Parents who neglected him, punished him, and failed him over and over. That quiet tragedy became one of the show's longest running and most affecting threads. The boy who survived a river kept smiling for years, while the people meant to love him kept letting him down, and the gap between his sweetness and his treatment became a kind of slow, ongoing heartbreak that the show returned to again and again. This story sits in sharp contrast to the one before it. Chef was a grown man who had picked a fight, an adult who chose a side and could, in some way, stand and take whatever came back at him. Butters is the exact opposite. He is a small child who did absolutely nothing wrong, who only ever wanted to help and to be loved, and the show proved it was every bit as willing to drag him through horror as it was to settle a score with an adult. The darkness this video keeps circling does not wait for a target who deserves it. It will fall on the cruelest kid in town, and it will fall just as hard on the kindest. Being good and gentle and blameless offered Butters no protection at all. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. At least Butters lived. As broken and scarred as he was by the end, he climbed out of that river and walked home, and the show let him keep breathing. The next time South Park built an entire story around a small, helpless, innocent child, it would not be so kind. A few seasons down the road, the show introduced a little boy of only 5 years old, a child with an illness that left him just weeks to live, and it gave that dying boy one small, simple wish to hold on to. Then it made everyone watch as the show took even that last bit of hope away from him.
Section 7. A dying boy and no happy ending. There's a kind of movie almost everyone has seen, even people who do not like sports. A washed up or unwilling adult gets stuck coaching a hopeless little team of misfit kids. The team is terrible at first. They lose, they trip over themselves, they fight. Then, slowly, they learn to believe in each other. There is usually a sick kid or a struggling kid they are all secretly playing for. And in the end, against all odds, the underdogs win the big game. The sick kid pulls through, and everyone learns that heart matters more than talent. The Mighty Ducks is the most famous version of it. These stories are built to make a person feel warm and hopeful. On the 15th of November 2006, South Park took that exact warm, reliable shape and used it to build one of the bleakest, most hopeless endings the show has ever aired.
The episode was the final one of the 10th season, the 153rd episode overall, written and directed by Trey Parker. Its name was Stanley's Cup. The setup follows the feel-good formula step by step, on purpose. Stan's bike gets towed away because of a pile of unpaid parking tickets, and the only way he can earn it back is by doing community service. The town hands him a job no kid would want. He has to coach the Park County Pee Wee hockey team, a group of tiny kindergartners who can barely stand up on their skates, let alone play a real game. They fall down constantly. They have no idea what they are doing. Stan, stuck with them against his will, is the reluctant coach the story needs. There is a side story running alongside it that pokes fun at the same kind of movie.
Stan's father, Randy, is horrified to learn his son is coaching hockey because years ago, when Stan was only 4 years old, Stan missed an important shot in a Pee Wee game and forced his team to settle for a tie. Randy has carried that small, silly disappointment around for years, treating it like a great family shame. And the side story is all about Randy losing his mind over a children's game and living out his own feelings through his son. It is the show gently mocking the over-serious sports parent, the type who turns a kid's game into a matter of life and death. Then the show introduces the piece that should make the whole thing sweet and instead turns it into a slow ache. One of the little players on Stan's team is a boy named Nelson. Nelson is about 5 years old and he is dying. He has a sickness the doctors cannot cannot cure, a cancer that is going to take his life, and he spends most of the episode pale and frail in a hospital bed rather than on the ice. Nelson is the sick kid the underdog story always has, the one the team is supposed to rally around and win for. He latches onto the team's success with everything he has left. In his mind, if Stan's team can just win a game, he might hold on. He looks up at his coach and asks Stan to win one for him. The first real game arrives, against another Pee Wee team from Adams County. Both teams are made of tiny children who cannot skate, so the game is a mess, and it ends with no goals at all, a flat 0-0 tie. The doctor treating Nelson explains in the show's grim joke language that this draw has left the boy stuck in a kind of in-between place, neither getting better nor letting go. Nelson then pins all of his remaining hope on the next game. If Stan's team can win that one, he will live. If they lose, he is sure he will die. The show laces even this sad stretch with the kind of dark, ice-cold humor it cannot help. Just a couple of months before this episode aired, a famous real-life television personality known for handling dangerous animals had died after being struck by a stingray, a death that had shocked people all over the world. The episode reaches straight for that fresh, real tragedy for a joke, with the doctor measuring how fast Nelson might die by comparing it to that man and the stingrays, and one of the little kids using the same comparison to guess their chances in the game. Dropping a real, recent death into a story about a dying child shows just how far the show was willing to push, refusing to let even the saddest setup go untouched by its meanest instincts. The final game is where the warm formula gets torn to pieces. Stan's team is set to play their big match at the large arena that is home to Colorado's professional team, the kind of grand stage where the underdogs in a movie would have their shining moment. The opposing Pee Wee team, the other group of little kids, never shows up. So instead of calling the game off, the professionals arrange for Stan's team of kindergartners to play their match against the Detroit Red Wings, a real professional team made up of full-grown men, some of the best and toughest hockey players in the world. What follows is not a game. It is a slaughter. The grown men do not simply beat the children on the scoreboard. They crush them physically, slamming into the tiny players, hurting them, wounding them, leaving the little kindergartners broken and bleeding on the ice. There is no mercy in it and no fairness in it, just adults destroying small children in front of a crowd. In the middle of the carnage, one of the battered little kids turns on his coach and tells Stan that he hates him because all of this misery traces back to Stan dragging them into these games. The team that was supposed to learn to believe in itself is instead beaten into the ground. While that beating plays out, the show cuts to the hospital. Nelson, the little boy whose whole hope rested on this game, sees that there is no win coming. The team is being destroyed. The miracle is not happening. And in that moment, the last of his hope drains away, and Nelson dies. The sick kid that every version of this story promises will pull through, the one whose survival is supposed to be the reward for everyone's effort, simply dies, alone with his fading hope, because the win never came. The final image is the cruelest twist of the knife. Out at the arena, the Detroit Red Wings, the grown men who just brutalized a team of kindergartners, lift the championship cup over their heads in triumph. They celebrate wildly, dancing and cheering as the famous victory anthem "We Are the Champions" by Queen blasts over the scene, the same song that plays when real champions win something glorious. Stan stands there and watches it, frozen in shock, unable to understand what he is seeing. The show places that joyful, golden celebration right up against the death of a 5-year-old boy, the winners dancing while the child they were supposedly playing for lies dead. The bad guys win, the good guys lose and bleed, the sick kid dies, and the people responsible throw a party. Underneath all of it, the episode is doing one clear and brutal thing. It takes the most comforting story shape in the world, the one built from start to finish to make people feel good, and it does the exact opposite at every single turn. In the warm version, the underdogs find a way to win, so here they are mangled by professionals. In the warm version, the sick child beats the odds and survives, so here he dies with no last-minute save. In the warm version, the cruel and powerful are humbled and the kind are rewarded, so here the powerful crush the weak and dance on top of the wreckage. The whole episode is the show taking the promise that this kind of story always makes and refusing on purpose to keep it. Every beat the audience has been trained to expect gets answered with its grimmest possible reverse. The reaction to the episode was unlike most South Park backlash. The show was used to upsetting critics and outside groups, and its loyal fans usually shrugged that off and defended it. This time, a lot of the show's own regular viewers were the ones who pushed back. Many longtime fans found the ending too bleak, too sad, too mean to stomach, a step past dark humor into something that that just hurt. It stood out as one of the rare episodes that the fanbase itself, not just the usual outsiders, turned on. The creators, for their part, reportedly stood behind it. They have suggested they found the ending funny, and that the people upset by it had simply missed the joke. That the whole point was to take the feel-good formula and yank the rug out from under everyone watching. Part of why it disturbs people so deeply is that it denies them the one thing the story keeps promising. From the first scene, every signal tells the audience that this is going to be a tale about hope winning out, about a sick child saved by a team that learned to believe. The show spends the whole episode building that expectation, letting it grow, letting viewers root for Nelson and for the little team. Then it kills the boy and crushes the kids and lets the villains celebrate. The cruelty is not just in what happens, it is in how carefully the show set up the comfort it was always planning to take away. A story that was sad from the start would let a person brace. This one feels like a warm hand reaching out and then closing into a fist. This story stands as the dark mirror of the one before it. Butters lived through his nightmare. As scarred and shaken as he was, he climbed out of that river, walked home, and the show let him keep going. Nelson got no such mercy. The show was willing to take a small, blameless, dying child and let him die with his last bit of hope ripped away, offering no lesson, no comfort, no meaning, and no win to soften the blow. It is the clearest proof yet of something this whole video keeps circling back to. South Park never owed its audience a happy ending, and it never felt any duty to make anyone feel okay when the credits rolled. The show had no floor, and it had no obligation to be kind, even to a sick 5-year-old. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. So far, the darkest moments in this video have all come dressed in big, loud events. A boy fed his parents, a forest full of devil worshippers,
A famous woman photographed to death, a beloved friend killed off in anger, a sweet child left to drown, a little boy dying while grown men danced. They are all enormous, terrible things, far outside the everyday life of most people watching. The next dark turn the show took was something far quieter and far closer to home. It did not involve murder or monsters or dying children. It involved a kid waking up one ordinary day to find that the whole world had gone gray, that his parents were falling apart, that his friends were drifting away from him, and that something inside him had quietly broken. The show pointed its darkness at its own main character and used him to say something painfully true about the simple act of growing up. Section 8. The Day the World Turned Gray. For most of its life, South Park ran by one quiet rule. Nothing ever stuck. A character could die, a town could burn, a friendship could shatter, and by the next episode, everything would be back to normal as if none of it had happened. The boys never aged. They never really changed. Whatever damage one week brought was wiped clean before the next. That rule was part of the show's whole shape, the reason it could be as cruel as it wanted with no lasting weight. On the 8th of June 2011, the show broke that rule on purpose. It told a story that did stick, that did change things, and it did so in the quietest and saddest way it ever had. The episode was the 7th one of the 15th season, the 216th episode overall, written and directed by Trey Parker. Its name was You're Getting Old, and it begins on Stan's 10th birthday. The reason behind the episode helps explain why it feels so different from everything else. By the time it aired, the show was 15 seasons old, and the two men who made it were not young anymore.
At that point, Matt Stone had just turned 40, and Trey Parker was 41. The very first piece of the story they built was Stan turning 10 and feeling somehow like he was getting old, and that feeling came straight from the creators looking at their own lives and their own long-running show. Underneath the whole episode sits a hard question they seem to be asking about themselves. Had they gotten old? Had the thing they made gotten old? Had all of it somehow started to turn into garbage? That word, garbage, is the heart of the episode, and the show makes it literal in a way only South Park would. On his 10th birthday, something changes inside Stan. Suddenly, everything he looks at and everything he listens to turns into the sight and sound of poop. Music that everyone else is enjoying comes out of the speakers as the noise of someone going to the bathroom. Movies look like piles of filth on the screen.
The world that used to be full of fun and color now appears to Stan, and to Stan alone, as one big heap of waste. It is a crude, silly gag on the surface, drawn with the show's usual love of bathroom humor. Underneath the silliness, it is one of the most honest pictures of depression and growing bitter that the show ever drew. The feeling it captures is the one a lot of people know too well. The moment when the things you used to love stop feeling special and start to seem fake, dull, and worthless. When the magic drains out of everything all at once and the world goes flat and gray. Stan's friends throw him a birthday party with music and a real band, and he cannot enjoy a single second of it. Everyone Everyone around him is having a good time, and all he can see and hear is filth. His parents grow worried about him. They take him to a doctor to find out what is wrong. The doctor first offers the gentle answer, the one a parent wants to hear, telling them that Stan's tastes are just naturally shifting as he gets older, that this is a normal part of growing up. Then, after looking closer, the doctor gives the blunt answer instead. Stan has become cynical, which is a way of saying he now expects the worst from everything, that he has started to find the whole world phony and pointless. The show names the condition out loud. Stan is not sick with a passing bug. Something in how he sees the world has soured, and it is not going to flip back on its own. That souring starts to cost him the people around him. Stan's new bitterness makes him miserable to be near. He tears down everything his friends like, finds the worst in everything, and drains the joy out of every room he walks into. His friends try to put up with it for a while, and then they stop. At the movie theater, Kyle, Cartman, and Kenny leave Stan behind, simply walking out on him because they cannot stand his attitude for one more minute. The friendship between Stan and Kyle, the closest bond on the whole show, begins to come apart, and Kyle starts drifting toward Cartman instead, the one kid Stan would never have expected to take his place. While Stan falls apart, his parents fall apart too. Randy and Sharon's marriage, which had survived years of nonsense, finally cracks under the weight of all this gray honesty. Sharon admits that she is unhappy as well, and she says something that quietly cuts deeper than any of the bathroom jokes. She tells Randy that she feels like she has been living the same day over and over again, going through the same routine on a loop with no change and no escape. The two of them look at each other and admit, plainly and sadly, that they have come to seem awful to one another. There is a strange side story tangled in here too, with a pair of old farmers who become so taken with Randy's new music that they break into the family's house to steal his underwear. A flash of the show's usual weirdness poking through the gloom. But the real movement of the episode is the marriage ending. Randy and Sharon decide to separate. Then comes the ending, and it is unlike almost anything the show had ever done. As a soft, sad song called Landslide by the band Fleetwood Mac begins to play, the only piece of music in the whole episode that does not turn into the sound of waste, the show gives the audience a long stretch with no jokes and almost no words at all. It is just a series of quiet images set to the music. Kyle walks by and sees Stan sitting alone, looking lost and sad, and he keeps walking without saying a single thing. Sharon and Stan's sister pack up the kitchen into boxes. A sign goes up in the yard, the family home now for sale.
Randy drives away in a moving truck, glancing back at the life he is leaving with a look of regret. Sharon and the children unpack their boxes in a small new apartment, the family now split in two. The police finally return Randy's stolen underwear. Kyle and Cartman sit together playing video games and share a warm smile, doing the exact thing that Stan and Kyle used to do together, the friendship simply handed off to someone new. And the song fades out on its final image, Stan lying alone on his bed in the new place, still gray inside, showing no sign that any of this is going to get better. Then the credits roll in complete silence. No music, no laugh, no wink, nothing to take the edge off. Beneath the poop jokes and the sad song, the episode is doing something the show had never quite tried before. It is turning its darkness inward.
Every other dark moment up to this point pointed outward, at a bully, at a celebrity, at a religion, at a sick child, at the cruel grown-ups around a sweet boy. This time the show pointed its darkness at its own main character, at the kid who had been the closest thing it had to a steady heart, and it used him to say something true and bleak about the simple act of growing up. Getting older, the episode says, can quietly drain the color out of the things you love. People drift apart for no dramatic reason at all, just because they have changed and can no longer stand each other. Families break, best friends become strangers, and sometimes there is no villain to blame, no lesson to learn, and no fix waiting at the end. The damage just settles in and stays. There is a second layer underneath that one, where the show looks straight at itself.
Sharon's line about living the same day over and over was the show describing its own format, the endless reset, the same kinds of jokes season after season. The whole question of whether everything had turned to garbage was the creators wondering, out loud, whether their 15-year-old show had grown stale, whether they were just repeating themselves, whether the magic had drained out of their own work the same way it drained out of Stan's world. Making their own main character watch everything turn to filth was a way of asking that painful question without quite answering it. The bleak, final feeling of the episode was so strong that a lot of people genuinely believed it was the end. Viewers and critics watched that silent montage, saw the family split up and the friendships die with no reset in sight, and many of them came away convinced that South Park itself was over, that Parker and Stone had just quietly quietly ended their own series. The episode felt so much like a goodbye that the speculation was everywhere. It carried the weight of a final chapter, the kind of slow, sad closing note that a show plays when it knows it is finished. It also drew a kind of praise the show rarely got. One major magazine writer admitted the episode actually moved him to tears, and described it as, at the very same time, one of the most childish things South Park had ever made, and possibly its most grown up. That same magazine later named it one of the best television episodes of the entire year. For a cartoon built on potty humor and shock, earning that response by way of a quiet story about depression and a marriage falling apart was its own kind of achievement. The show did not actually end. The Bleak Hour turned out to be the first half of a two-part story, with the second half arriving months later in the fall. Even that follow-up refused to hand out an easy comfort though.
When the family was eventually patched back together and the world stopped looking like garbage to Stan, the reason was dark in its own quiet way. Stan had started drinking to cope, doling his bitterness with alcohol so that things could look normal again. The sadness of You're Getting Old never fully lifted. It just got buried under a new and unhealthy way of getting through the day, leaving the hero changed in a way the show let linger. The reason this episode hit so hard is different from all the loud horrors that came before it. A boy being fed his parents, a forest of devil worshippers, a child left to drown, a 5-year-old dying while grown men danced. These are nightmares far outside the ordinary life of almost everyone watching. They shock because they are extreme. You're Getting Old works the opposite way. Its darkness is small and familiar and close, the kind almost everyone recognizes from their own life. The slow fading of joy, the friend who stops calling, the parents who split up, the morning when the world just looks gray for no reason you can name. The show took the most everyday sadness there is and stated it without softening it, and then it let the credits run in silence, so there was nowhere to hide from the feeling. A monster can be left behind on the screen. This kind of darkness follows a person home. This episode proves something important about how far the show's reach went. South Park did not need murder or monsters or dying children to land its darkest blow. It could put aside all the blood and shock entirely and simply tell the truth about getting older and watching things fall apart. And that truth could hurt more than any of the grand horrors. The show that had no floor and no duty to comfort anyone had just shown it could break a heart with nothing louder than a sad song and a quiet montage of a family moving out. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing.
It helps the channel tremendously. Up to now, every dark turn in this video has been personal in one way or another, aimed at a single boy, a single family, a single friend. The next one points somewhere much larger. The show would take its darkness off of one kid's private heartbreak and aim it at something the whole country was living through together. A real and ongoing horror that had become so common that people had stopped reacting to it at all. Years after Stan's gray birthday, South Park would open an entire season by staring straight at that horror, and at the strange, chilling numbness of a nation that had quietly learned to look away. Section 9. The horror everyone stopped seeing. The darkest moments in this video so far have mostly stayed personal. One boy, one family, one friend, one dying child. On the 26th of September 2018, South Park did something larger and, in its own quiet way, more chilling.
It opened an entire new season by walking straight into the most painful and most real subject in the whole country, and it found a way to make that subject even darker than expected. The episode aimed its eye not at the violence everyone feared, but at something underneath it that had grown far more disturbing. The episode was the first one of the 22nd season, the 288th episode overall, written and directed by Trey Parker. Its name was Dead Kids. To understand the episode, the real world around it has to come first. By 2018, school shootings had become a regular, horrifying part of American life. They happened again and again, year after year, each one filling the news for a while before the country moved on. In the months before this episode aired, the nation had lived through yet another terrible school shooting, one that set off a huge and emotional argument about guns, about safety, about why nothing ever seemed to change. People marched, people shouted at each other, and then, as always, the noise faded and life rolled on, until the next one happened. That endless, hopeless cycle. The horror, followed by the argument, followed by the silence, followed by another horror, was exactly what the show set out to capture. The creators knew how raw the subject was. They teased the episode beforehand with a joke aimed at themselves, posting online with a hashtag suggesting that the show ought to be canceled, poking fun at the idea that they were finally about to go too far. The dark joke of it was that the episode was not really trying to shock anyone with blood or gore. The thing it wanted to show was much harder to look at than any cartoon violence. The central idea announces itself in the very first scene. Inside a classroom at South Park Elementary, the teacher is handing back the results of a test. Cartman is annoyed because he failed, even though he had copied his answers off of another kid in class.
It is an ordinary, small school morning, the kind of opening any sitcom might have. Then, partway through the lesson, a shooting breaks out at the school, and the children do not scream, they do not run, they do not even really stop. The class simply keeps going, the kids calmly answering the teacher's questions as the violence happens around them, treating the gunfire the way a person might treat a fire drill they have sat through 100 times before. The whole horrifying point of the episode lands in that one moment. The shooting is treated as background noise. It is just another thing that happens at school, no more alarming than a pop quiz. From there, the numbness spreads across the whole town. The adults shrug the shootings off, the teachers shrug them off. Parents do not so much as blink when they hear that their children narrowly avoided being killed at school that day. A school shooting, in this version of South Park, has become so common and so expected that nobody can be bothered to feel anything about it anymore. The town has lived through so many that the events have stopped registering, the way a person stops hearing a sound they have heard every single day. The shootings keep coming, and the people keep not caring, and life keeps moving along as if nothing is wrong at all. Against all of that stands one single person who still feels the horror the way a person should. Sharon Marsh, Stan's mother, is the only one in the entire town who reacts with grief and outrage. She cannot understand how everyone around her has gone so cold. She wants people to be sad. She wants them to be angry. She wants them to care that children are dying. And she keeps demanding over and over that the people around her feel something, anything about what is happening. The way the town answers her is the cruelest and sharpest turn in the whole episode.
Instead of waking up and joining her, the town decides that Sharon is the one with the problem. They treat her grief as an annoyance. They see her demand that people care as her being a killjoy, a downer, someone making everyone uncomfortable by refusing to let things stay calm. Her own husband Randy decides that Sharon is simply being overly emotional and moody, and he spends much of the episode trying to help her get her feelings back under control, as if her horror at dead children were just a bad mood she needed to shake off. The show lands a hard point through that. A person who still feels the right thing, who still reacts to a horror the way any decent person should, gets pushed aside and labeled as crazy or hysterical, while everyone who feels nothing gets to call themselves normal. There is a small side story running through it, with Cartman stewing over his failed math test and blaming the kid he tried to copy from for not letting him cheat. He becomes convinced the other boy is sliding him on purpose. That little plot serves a purpose. It shows the children fussing over tiny, selfish problems, a bad grade, a personal grudge, while real life and death danger swirls around them unnoticed. The mismatch between how small their worries are and how enormous the horror around them is becomes its own quiet comment on how out of order everyone's priorities have become. The ending is where the episode delivers its coldest blow. Sharon, worn down by fighting a battle no one will join, finally gives up. She stops demanding that people care. She lets her horror go and slips into the same numb, indifferent state as everyone else around her. And the moment she does, the moment she stops caring, her marriage troubles smooth over and she and Randy make peace. Her caring had been the only thing causing friction. Once she surrenders and becomes just as cold as the rest of the town, everything is calm again. Then the phone rings.
The news comes that her son Stan has been shot, and Sharon, now fully numb like everyone else, reacts with a flat, empty shrug. Randy does too. The episode ends on a mother being told her own child has been shot and barely looking up from what she is doing. The surrender complete. Beneath the dark comedy, the episode is making one furious, unmistakable point. The real horror it wants to show is not the shootings themselves. The real horror is the numbness around them. The show argues that the most frightening thing about these tragedies, after they happen enough times, is the way a whole society quietly learns to treat them as normal, as background, as just another part of the day not worth getting upset over. And worse, the way the people who still do get upset, the ones who refuse to go numb, end up treated as the problem, dismissed as too emotional, told to calm down and stop making everyone uncomfortable. The episode holds that idea up like a mirror and dares the country to look at its own reflection. The choice to make the violence boring is what gives the episode its power. The show could have staged the shootings as huge, dramatic, frightening events, the way a serious movie would. Instead, it deliberately made them dull and routine, something the characters barely glance at. That flatness is the entire message. By refusing to treat the shootings as a big deal on screen, the show forces the audience to feel how strange and wrong it is that anyone could treat them as a small deal in real life. life. The lack of reaction is louder than any scream could have been. The way people responded to the episode showed how differently it landed from a normal week of the show. It drew about 1 million viewers, which made it the least watched season opener in the show's entire history up to that point, a steep drop from the season opener the year before. Whether people stayed away because the subject was too raw, or simply because the show's audience had been shrinking, the timing fit the mood of the episode. Critics read it clearly as a blast of anger aimed at the country's failure to care. One writer, describing it as a furious middle finger pointed straight at apathy over school shootings. The episode was not built to be fun. It was built to make people uncomfortable about something they had let themselves stop feeling. The reason it cuts so deep is that the numbness it shows is real and recognizable. A boy fed his parents in a cartoon, and that is a nightmare safely locked behind the screen. A whole society growing numb to children dying is not locked behind anything. It is the actual world the audience lives in. The same cycle of horror and argument and silence that plays out for real over and over.
The show pointed at a feeling people could recognize in their own lives. The way a terrible piece of news can land and then fade by lunchtime. The way a tragedy can become just another headline scrolled past. Naming that numbness out loud and showing where it leads, a parent shrugging at her own shot child, is the kind of darkness that does not stay on the screen. It follows the viewer back into the real world and makes them wonder how much of it they have caught themselves. This episode shows the full range of where the show could aim. The story about Stan's gray birthday turned the darkness inward, onto one boy's private heartbreak and one family falling apart. Dead Kids turns that same darkness all the way outward, onto an entire country and a real, ongoing horror. And it points the blame not at any single villain, but at the numbness of everyone watching, including the people in the audience.
The show that had no floor and no duty to comfort anyone had now used its darkness to put a whole nation on trial for how little it had come to feel. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Through every story in this video, one thing has stayed the same. The darkness, no matter how cruel or how sad, has stayed safely behind the screen. A thing the show could do to its characters and its viewers without any real danger flowing back the other way. The final story breaks that pattern completely. It is the one time the show's willingness to go anywhere reached off the screen and into the real world in the most frightening way possible, when a single set of jokes brought real threats of real violence down on the actual people who made the show, when a cartoon found itself censored out of genuine fear, and when the question of how far is too far stopped being about comedy and started being about whether anyone was going to get hurt. Section 10, The Time Fear Won. Through every story in this video, one thing has held true. The darkness, no matter how cruel or how sad, lived safely behind the screen. It was a thing the show did to its own made-up town, its own characters, and its own audience's feelings. And then the screen went dark and everyone walked away unharmed. A boy ate his parents and nobody real got hurt. A famous woman was photographed to death and the real world kept turning. The show could go anywhere it wanted because in the end, it was only a cartoon, and a cartoon cannot reach out and touch the people watching it. In April of 2010, that wall between the show and the real world came down, and for the first time, the darkness flowed in both directions. The stories at the heart of this are the 5th and 6th episodes of the 14th season, the 200th and 201st episodes the show had ever made. They were written and directed by Trey Parker. They aired 1 week apart on the 14th and the 21st of April 2010, and their names are simply 200 and 201. To understand why these two episodes carried real danger, one subject has to come first. For most of its life, South Park made fun of every religion it could find, loudly and with no fear at all. It mocked Christians, it mocked Jewish people, it mocked Catholics, it mocked Mormons, and it treated no belief as too sacred to touch. There was one exception the show had always handled with extra care, and that was showing the Prophet Muhammad, the central holy figure of Islam. In many Islamic traditions, making any image of Muhammad at all is forbidden and treated as a deep and serious insult. The show had actually shown him once before, years earlier, back in its 5th season, drawn plainly and standing among a team of other religious figures, and at the time, almost no one said a word about it. Then the world changed around the issue. A newspaper in Denmark printed drawings of Muhammad and set off riots and threats all across the globe, with embassies burned and people killed in the unrest that followed. A filmmaker in the Netherlands was murdered in broad daylight by an extremist for making a film that criticized how women were treated in some Islamic societies. The simple act of drawing one religious figure figure had become, in the real world, something people were being killed over. This was not the first time the show had wrestled with that exact problem on screen. A few years earlier, in its 10th season, South Park had told a two-part story built entirely around it. In that story, the town falls into a panic because another cartoon is planning to show Muhammad, and everyone is terrified of what might happen to them simply for being nearby when it airs. The whole thing became the show arguing, out loud, that a society has only two choices when someone threatens violence over a drawing. It can stand firm and refuse to be bullied, or it can give in a little, and then a little more, until it has no freedom left at all. And then real life stepped right into that very episode, because the show's own network got scared and blacked out the image of Muhammad inside the cartoon that was busy preaching about not backing down.
So by 2010, the creators had already fought this fight once, already made their point about standing up to fear, and already watched their own bosses blink. The 200th episode was them walking right back into the same ring, knowing exactly how dangerous it was. That episode was meant to be a celebration, a proud milestone for a show that had lasted far longer than anyone ever expected. To mark it, the creators brought back a huge crowd of the famous people and groups the show had angered over its many years, gathering up nearly everyone who had ever been furious at South Park into one episode, a living scrapbook of every fight the show had ever picked. Led by the movie star Tom Cruise, this army of offended celebrities bands together and threatens to sue the town unless they can get their hands on Muhammad. The reason they want him is the heart of the whole idea.
Muhammad has a special power, the one thing that made him untouchable in a way no other figure in the world was. The simple fact that he alone could not be shown or mocked without bringing real danger down on whoever did it. The celebrities want that power for themselves, so that they too can become impossible to make fun of. To dance around the rule while telling the story, the show kept Muhammad hidden the entire time, tucking him inside a full mascot costume so the character was talked about and present but never once shown on screen. The show was trying to have it both ways, putting Muhammad in the story while never breaking the rule by drawing his actual face. Bringing all of those old enemies back together in one place was its own kind of statement. Over the years, the show had gone after movie stars, singers, politicians, whole religions, and powerful companies, and almost every single time, the fight had ended in the same quiet way.
The target would complain or send an angry letter or grumble in an interview, and then nothing much would happen and the show would roll right on untouched. That long history of always coming out on top is a big part of what made the creators so bold in the first place. They had learned over and over again that no matter how hard they hit, the worst they would ever face was hurt feelings and some bad press. Walking into the 200th episode, every lesson the show had ever learned told the two of them that this fight would end exactly like all the others before it. The follow-up episode reached back and pulled one more thread tight, and it tied this final story all the way back to the very first one in this whole video. In the 201st episode, Scott Tenorman returns. The older boy from the Chili story, the one Cartman had fed his own murdered parents, comes back changed and broken.
After eating his mother and father, Scott had been driven completely insane, and he had spent time locked away in a mental hospital where he became obsessed with one single thing: making Cartman pay. He even rebuilt his hideout to look like the Chili Festival where his whole life had been destroyed. By this point, Scott had taken charge of a group of angry red-haired kids, and that group had decided they wanted Muhammad's power for themselves, so that they too could become impossible to make fun of. They threatened to blow up the entire town unless Muhammad was handed over to them, and they set off bombs that killed a couple of famous people, which finally made everyone start taking the threat seriously. The group then kidnapped Cartman and the other boys, along with a lineup of every man who might possibly be Cartman's real father. That is when Scott delivers the cruelest piece of news the show ever handed Cartman. Scott reveals that he had dug up the buried truth about who Cartman's father really was. Cartman's true biological father, it turns out, was a former football player for the Denver Broncos, a man who had been with Cartman's mother years before, and the town had covered the whole thing up to protect the football team from a scandal. That player's name was Jack Tenorman. He was Scott's father too, which means that back in Scott Tenorman Must Die, when Cartman had Scott's parents killed and ground into chili and fed to Scott, Cartman had unknowingly arranged the murder of his own father, and then fed his own father to his own half-brother. The single darkest act in the entire show turned out, years later, to be even darker than anyone watching had ever understood. The boy who proved how evil he could be by feeding a child his parents had, without knowing it, destroyed part of his own family in the same cruel stroke. And the show had been quietly sitting on that secret for nearly a decade before it finally sprang it. Looked at that way, the Chili from the very first part of this video and these buried, dangerous dangerous episodes at the end form the front and back covers of one long, dark book, and the show closed that book by reaching back and making its worst joke even worse than it had been. That reveal alone would have made the episode unforgettable. What happened around it in the real world made it dangerous. After the 200th episode aired, a man posted a message on a website run by violent extremists. He wrote under a made-up name, though he turned out to be a young American born in Virginia, a former high school athlete who had converted and then fallen in with a violent and hateful version of the faith. His message was aimed straight at Trey Parker and Matt Stone. He warned them that they would probably end up like that Dutch filmmaker who had been murdered, and to drive the point home, he posted a graphic photograph of that murdered man's body. Alongside it, he posted the real-world addresses of the show's offices and the creator's production company, and he urged the people reading to go pay them a visit. He claimed, carefully, that it was not a threat, only a warning about what would likely happen to them. The meaning was impossible to miss. Two men who made a cartoon were now being publicly marked for death, with their workplaces listed for anyone angry enough to act on it. The frightening part was that this threat was not empty talk. Around the world, the exact thing the message described had already happened to real people more than once. The Dutch filmmaker in that photograph had truly been murdered in the street. The cartoonist who had drawn Muhammad for that Danish newspaper spent years living under guard, and some of them survived real attempts on their lives. People had died in riots set off by nothing more than drawings. So when a violent stranger posted the creator's home and work addresses beside a picture of a murdered man, there was a long line of real bodies standing behind the warning, proving it was the kind of threat that sometimes came true. That grim history is what made the network's fear so easy to understand, even as that very fear handed the bullies the exact victory they had been demanding. The week after that message went up, the show was set to air the follow-up, the 201st episode, which continued the story. This is the moment the show's long winning streak against fear finally broke. The network that aired South Park got scared, and it stepped in and heavily blocked out large parts of the episode without the creator's approval. Every single time the name Muhammad was spoken, the network bleeped it into silence. Every time the hidden character appeared, the network covered him with a large black box with the word censored stamped across it. And near the end of the episode came the heaviest cut of all. There was a speech delivered by the characters Kyle, Jesus, and Santa Claus running about 35 seconds, and the network bleeped the entire thing into a solid wall of beeps so that not one word of it could be heard by anyone watching at home. The message hidden inside that bleeped speech was the whole reason the two episodes existed in the first place. The idea the characters were trying to say out loud was that the special power Muhammad seemed to hold, the power to never be laughed at, was not really a magic power at all. It was only fear. The reason no one could show him was that people were afraid of what angry and violent people might do in return.
And the characters were about to point out the trap buried inside that, which is that anyone at all can gain the very same power, as long as they are willing to make people frightened enough of them. Threaten people hard enough and the world will start to treat you as untouchable too. That was the warning the show wanted to deliver, and it was the exact warning the network decided it could not let air, which only proved how true the warning was. The creators were furious, and they made sure the world understood what had happened. They put out a statement explaining that the silenced speech was not their idea, and not some clever trick they had played for laughs. People watching had wondered whether the bleeping was a joke, a bit of the show poking fun at the very idea of being censored. Parker and Stone said plainly that it was nothing of the kind. The speech the network erased had been a real and serious message about intimidation and fear, and the one point they most wanted to make was the one point they were not allowed to make. Here is where the story becomes almost too perfect to be real. The speech that got wiped out was a speech about refusing to give in to fear, and the reason it got wiped out was fear. The network looked at a death threat, a photo of a murdered man, and the addresses of its own offices, and it decided to silence the exact part of the episode that argued people should not be silenced by threats. The real world acted out the precise lesson the episode was trying to teach, and it acted it out in the worst way imaginable. For years, the show had thrown its darkness at the world and dared anyone to do something about it, certain that nothing could ever reach back through the screen. This time, something did reach back, and when it did, the people in charge chose safety over the message, and the message vanished into beeps. The one show that seemed to fear nothing at all got quieted, and the thing that quieted it was fear itself. The reach of it spread well beyond the show. The censorship became national news, and the debate around it grew into something much larger than one cartoon. Some people argued that giving in to the threat, blocking out a name and a speech because a violent person had demanded it, taught every future bully a simple and dangerous lesson, that threats work. There was a deeper worry underneath it all, that free countries were slowly learning to keep quiet out of fear, one careful silence at a time, until the only ideas left safe to say were the ones nobody minded hearing.
In the weeks that followed, an artist far away from the show, angry at the silencing, proposed a day where everyone would draw Muhammad at once. The idea being that no single person can be threatened into silence if thousands of people speak at the very same moment. That idea spread fast, and it stirred up its own fresh storm of anger and threats in turn. One bleeped speech in a cartoon had become a flashpoint in a fight that reached far past comedy. The damage to the show did not stop once the episode finished airing. The 201st episode was pulled from the show's own website almost right away, made impossible to watch there, and the silence stuck. To this day, both the 200th and the 201st episodes remain gone, left off the streaming services and the home video collections where every other episode of the show can be found. Out of the show's hundreds and hundreds of episodes, covering nearly 30 years of mocking everything under the sun, these two became part of a rare handful that a person essentially cannot watch anymore, hidden away and kept out of reach. The fight that began as a proud celebration of the show's 200th episode ended with 2 episodes quietly buried, the only lasting casualties in the show's long war on taking things seriously. After this, the show changed the way it carried itself around this one single subject. For all of its endless boldness everywhere else, South Park never again tried to show Muhammad, and the wall of caution around the topic never really came back down. The 2 buried episodes became a quiet scar on the show's history, the single fight in its whole loud and fearless run that it did not win. Everything else the show ever did, no matter how cruel or how shocking, it could put back on the air and stand behind. These two, it could not. They remain the proof that even a show with no floor and no limits had run into one wall it could not push through, and that the wall was built out of nothing but fear. The man who set all of this in motion did not walk away clean, and his ending matters to the story. He was a college dropout and a recent convert who had thrown himself completely into the most violent ideas he could find, following a radical preacher and spreading material that tried to justify killing anyone who insulted Muhammad. His online activity went further still, including urging people to leave suspicious packages out in public so that police would slowly stop reacting to them, making it easier for a real bomb to slip through later. After posting his threats against the show, he kept traveling down that dark road. He tried more than once to go overseas and join a foreign group that the United States had labeled a terrorist organization, and on one of those attempts, he reportedly brought his own infant son along to the airport, thinking that a man traveling with a baby would look less suspicious. He was arrested in the summer of 2010. He pleaded guilty to several serious crimes, including making the threats against the show's writers and trying to support a terrorist group, and in February of 2011, he was sentenced to 25 years in prison, with more years of supervision to follow after his release. At his sentencing, one of the government's lawyers said that his actions had made people all across the country afraid to speak out, even in jest, frightened that a simple joke might get them marked as an enemy who deserved to die. The judge told him he had gone from a high school athlete to a traitor. The man himself said he was ashamed and bewildered by the path he had taken. The young man who had tried to silence a cartoon through terror lost a quarter of a century of his own life for it. Beneath all of the news and the court records, these 2 episodes stand apart from everything else in this video for one simple reason. Every other dark moment was something the show chose to do. The show fed a boy his parents. The show hid devil worshippers inside A Christmas Story. The show killed off its own beloved friend. The show let a small child die with no comfort. The show held a mirror up to a numb and uncaring country. In every one of those cases, the darkness flowed in one direction, from the show outward, with the people who made it sitting safe on the far side of the screen. With 200 and 201, the darkness flowed back. Real threats landed on real people. A real photograph of a real murdered man was used to frighten 2 living creators. Real addresses went up online beside an open invitation to violence. The darkness stopped being a story and became a genuine danger to actual human beings. The question the show had played with for so many years, the question of how far is too far, stopped being a question about taste and comedy. It became a question about whether real people were going to be hurt. And for the first time in the show's life, the answer was uncertain enough that the grown-ups in charge blinked and pulled back. No angry letter or hurt celebrity had ever managed to make the show flinch like that. It took a real threat of real violence against real people to do what nothing else in 30 years had done. Looking back across everything in this video, these final 2 episodes complete a long
long and dark arc. The chili proved the show had no bottom floor, that it would walk a calm and patient cruelty straight up to the audience. The Christmas Critters proved it could bury that same darkness inside the sweetest, softest wrapping it could find. Britney proved it could aim the darkness at a real living person and then turn the blame on everyone watching. The movie makers proved it would attack even the most beloved and powerful people alive and mean every word of it. Chef proved it would turn that darkness on the people closest to it, settling a real fight by killing one of its own. Butters and Nelson proved it would spend its cruelty just as freely on the most innocent and helpless souls it had, a trusting little boy and a dying child. Stan's Great Birthday proved the darkness could go quiet and personal, breaking a heart with nothing louder than a sad song. The Numb Town proved it could put an entire country on trial for how little it had come to feel.
And these last two episodes prove the final thing, that the darkness the show had been hurling out at the world for years could come roaring back through the screen as genuine life or death danger, and that even a show with no floor and no fear had a point where the world finally pushed back hard enough to win. That is the full sweep of it. 10 moments where one cartoon went further than almost anything else on television ever has, into murder and grief and madness and real danger, and somehow kept going after every one of them. Seeing all of them laid side by side leaves one large question still standing, and it is the question worth ending on. A show does not keep going this far for this long by accident. Something keeps driving it back to the darkest corners it can find, decade after decade, long past the point where it had anything left to prove to anyone. The thing left to figure out is why.
After nearly 30 years and hundreds of episodes, the show had every reason to soften, to play things safe, and to coast on the name it had already built. It kept reaching for the darkest material it could find anyway, long after pure shock alone could have carried it. That kind of staying power, that refusal to ever calm down even a little, is rare enough that it has to mean something real, and the meaning is hidden somewhere deep inside the long list of dark places this entire video has just walked carefully through together. Why a show built on crude laughs keeps reaching for the things that genuinely disturb, what the two men behind it are actually chasing when they go to those places, whether there is any real line left at all that they will not cross, and what it says about the millions of people who keep coming back year after year to watch them do it. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.